Well, thanks for jumping into another episode. My name's Nathan Battershall. I'm the host of the Residential Developer Podcast, and I've been really excited for a while. Today, I'm really privileged to have the team from Vanguard Consulting Engineers. I've got Daniel and Minh with me today. Welcome to the podcast, guys.
Thanks, Nathan. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, good to have you guys in. Look, maybe just to kick us off, do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourselves and maybe a little bit about Vanguard, what you guys specialise in?
So Vanguard is a engineering consultancy business. It's fairly new, as you would know. We did a merger in the early year, beginning of the year, with a colleague of mine, and we've kind of combined our team together. We kind of offer civil, structural, and stormwater design for residential projects, commercial projects, any kind of development, actually. And Minh is one of our, senior civil stormwater engineers. That's in our team at the moment. And I was at the beginning as a structural engineer, but I've kind of merged into helping Minh with the civil and the stormwater department of the company. And yeah, that's a bit about us, to be honest. Minh handles all the, all the stormwater part of things, flooding, civil, and he does quite a big range of projects. Anywhere from a granny flat up to, class 2 buildings, multi-residential. And yeah, that's pretty much us.
Excellent. What about yourselves? How long have you guys been in the game? How long have you been practicing as engineers?
I've been an engineer, I would say, for about 8 years now.
Yeah.
Started when my early 20s, during my uni period, and graduated and continued working full-time. Been in the industry for 8 years, but in engineering, but construction I've been for a while because I was doing work throughout uni, working as a labourer and understanding how things work. But I would say about 8 years. Minh, how about yourself?
For me, so I've been in the industry for about 7 years now. So similar to Daniel, I start off in my early 20s as the stormwater engineer and then start to transition into civil and flooding related projects. So I've done a fair bit of projects from like most simple one, like granny flat up to like industrial warehouse and class 2 building, those sort of developments. Yeah.
Excellent. That's really good. Look, I think stormwater's obviously for today, and I think there'll be episodes where we can talk about structural, flooding, all different elements, but stormwater's a really key one. Obviously, our listeners are developers, investors, mums and dads doing development-based projects, whether it be duplexes, townhouses, dual locks, granny flats, anything investment development-based. And stormwater is a big key thing, and especially in that initial due diligence period, finding a site, securing a site. And, for me, stormwater can obviously make or break.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
A site.
Right.
Have you guys found that that's a really key factor when it comes to initially due diligence period? Like, do you guys do much around that side of it, helping advise people before they buy a site, just to check the site out for, that it can be drained from a stormwater point of view?
Yeah, we do get quite a lot of developers and clients that we've had a long-term working relationship with them. Initially, I've always kind of guided them, before you buy a site, first things first, just get the 10.7, a planning certificate where you get from council. That will kind of stipulate whether if it's flood affected or not. And also a title search is critical. And these items generally come with the contract of sale.
Yes.
And we always tell them, first things first, check these two items because the title search can show that there's a possibility of an easement that's on the property.
Yes.
And that comes really important when the site drains to the rear, with a natural slope back to the back. However, there's been some scenarios where the developer has kind of sent me the temp title search, like, oh, great, I've got an easement. And I've had a look. I'm like, yeah, be careful because it's burdened to your lot.
Yes.
They weren't benefited to the lot, which was quite critical.
Yes.
And he was like, very great, like very thankful of like how we picked that up for him. And I always find that, those two little two items can make a big difference.
Yep.
Just those little two items can tell you a lot, you know.
Yeah.
Especially being the 10.7, can tell you whether if it's a low risk, medium risk, high risk, and depending on the flood catchment, it actually gives you the report that they've done the analysis on.
Yep.
And then me and myself, you know, would sometimes go and dig into that catchment and that flood report and just see how heavily flood affected it is.
Yes.
Generally, when it's a high risk area, you won't be able to do a CDC, depending on the impact of the flood on the lot. But yeah, generally we always try to tell our developer and our work clients that we work with, anything you need, just let us know. Just get these two items for us, and then being if it is flood affected, we're always we do understand there's a flood report that we can get a good indication. But if they can take that step further and order the flood advice letter from council, that would give us the site-specific, flood impact on the whole site, which is generally, the best possible result that we could get.
Yep.
And yeah, I will probably say that's
No, it's good.
most essential.
That's good. And I think you hit on something there, and I just want to backtrack to that because I think that was really good advice. And I think obviously most people who are acquiring a site, they do have access to a contract of sale. If it's someone who already owns the site, well, I always say to people, it's not worth risking spending thousands and hundreds of thousands doing a development when you're not willing to spend a couple of $100 to buy those reports. We're talking 10.7,
Of course.
$160 odd, a cert of title, maybe $35, deposited plan. There's 3 or 4 documents, obviously very key, and that even that flood certificate. Some councils it's even free now, but normally it's maybe $100 roughly.
Yeah.
It's worth it, isn't it? To spend that little bit of money on those reports so that you can get thorough due diligence.
Oh, honestly, I couldn't agree more. It could make a big impact. We've had 10.7 saying the flood was a low risk, and then we got them to order the flood advice, and that the low risk was more predominantly on the neighbor, and then they were more to a medium, and sometimes just making that, paying that fee of $100, $150 can make a big difference. Because that can save you in the long run. And sometimes people are so confident that, you can do a CDC, but then when they see the flood advice, that could change the whole thing. Then the whole design could change because the design controls are different in terms of planning and, your side of things.
Yeah, that's right. And then I guess there are some people that only want to do CDCs or some people that are happy to do DA but then need to obviously get a longer settlement maybe on the site.
Of course.
So by knowing that early on, it's key, massively key.
Yeah.
Now, just quickly, again, I just want to backtrack. You brought up something about the on the cert of title or about how an easement can be burdened or benefit or a benefit to that property. Do you want to just really high level, just quickly run people through that? Because I think it's important for developers, investors, when they are looking at a contract or at those planning documents to understand that. Obviously, it's good to rely on consultants to do that, but I think it's important for people to be educated around spotting and identifying that for themselves too. Do you want to just quickly give us an outline on what that means?
Of course.
What it means if an easement's benefited to that site or burdened to that site?
I've actually got a good example. I did a job a few years back. It was in Glen Alpine under Campbelltown City Council. There was a massive easement at the back, 5 meters wide, and it was a private easement. It didn't belong to any of the neighbouring properties except for the one further down because it was such a steep site. And my client, it's a mum and dad, they were building a family home. They sent it to me. They said, look, we're interested in buying this property, to build a home. I'm like, yeah, it looks great. They're like, we've got an easement enforced to the rear. I'm like, perfect. Can you send me the title search? Had a look at it. I went to this title search and I went to the, I think it's called the Section 88B instrument, where it shows where you're benefited or burdened. Now the easement travelled behind his property and a few others, and unfortunately he wasn't allowed to tap into it because the one property behind him was benefited, which gave him permission to tap in, but his property was burdened and he was not allowed. I'm like, look, lucky we picked this up because your site is so steep, you won't be able to get the water out to the front. We've got to tap into the rear. We need to find the way that we can get permission from these owners to tap into this easement. So the process was to find out who owned the easement, go to land titles, see if they could give us any information, which they did, and we wrote a letter to the private, the owners of the easement. And they asked for all of our site calculations of how many litres of per second of the dwelling going into this easement. And they were quite comfortable with only was such a low, because it was just a single dwelling.
Yeah.
Nothing too intense. And yeah, they were quite happy with that. And they gave us the restriction lifted. We updated to land titles. And yeah, we got the process going.
Yep. So now it's benefited.
Now it's benefited on their title now. So if you were to order another title search on the next set, it will be benefited to that block.
Great. That's a great outcome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And look, I think obviously in a lot of areas around New South Wales, obviously we're dealing with a lot of sites that slope various directions. All across obviously there's some areas, especially in the rural, Western, Central West, Riverina, a lot of those areas, sites are quite flat, even parts of Sydney and coastal areas, but we're seeing a lot more sites that are sloping sites. And it's funny, you'll see on one side of the street, everything slopes on one side of the road. You've got everything that slopes to the curb. Yeah. And then obviously on the other side of the road, everything slopes backwards. And it's interesting when you see a lot of people buying properties without actually doing their research, or they're saying, "Oh, look, I bought this duplex block really cheap. It was so cheap," and then you realise, well, you can't actually drain it. You need an easement.
Exactly.
But look, I think one thing I think would really help listeners and developers, investors doing projects would be to understand the different types of stormwater drainage systems that are available for smaller projects, duplexes, townhouses, that sort of thing. And obviously we're not going to go so high level talking council to council because every council's different, as we know. Some councils only allow easement, nothing else for backward sloping blocks. Other ones you can be creative and come up with ways that comply with the development control plan. But can we just run through the different types of easements generally the different types of stormwater systems that are around? And I think just so people can understand what that actually is, because I think, for example, absorption, yes, a builder might understand, but the average mum or dad may not understand what that is, what's the purpose of it, how it works. Like obviously, for time's sake, you don't have to go too high level, but can we talk through some different stormwater systems from the basic, the most basic down to a few that are available?
So as we just talked about earlier, we should talk about the easement, which is the most a practical way for the sloping backside. But there are different methods, such as I think for smaller scale developments, we can do like a charge line system. But if we have other requirement like an on-site detention, then that charge line is not really effective anymore. So we can go with different options such as absorption that we just talked about. Absorption system is more like this like a underground storage area. So the water just get collected in that area and it just slowly absorbed through the soil. And the important thing to know is that the absorption is more applicable for more like a sandy area soil type. So which is along the coast mostly. For area inside the land, it's not that beneficial anymore. So that's why we sort of change our direction into providing a level spreader system instead. So for level spreader, it's more like just think of it as a slotted pipe, grab it in gravel, and then just gonna be underground. So the water get collected into that trench, and then it slowly build up, and then upwelling from the gravel trench. So it becomes like a sheet flow, very low velocity, so it doesn't create like scour throughout the land. Yeah, that's the most common things.
Yep.
For some other council, some of them are also allow like pump out system, but it's up to council discrepancy. But that some council do accept that, which is a good thing.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And look, just because the site slopes backwards, do you find sometimes there are methods in how to be creative to get the water to the curb? For example, like obviously not every council you can do that, but have you got some idea, just some tips or ways that you've been able to, in some councils, be able to get water to the curb, even if it is slightly backward sloping? You don't have to be like council. You don't have to be council specific, but, but just in general, because I think a lot of people don't realise that there are sometimes there are creative ways that are fully compliant as well to drain stormwater.
Yeah, we've had some scenarios where we can achieve that possibility where we can charge a line to the boundary. So get, the pressure from the head pressure from the gutter to take the water to push it out to the street on boundary. And then we can kind of, if we've got a natural fall from boundary out to the curb and gutter, that's a possibility of also achieving that, which is a great trick. Also, we also look into in terms of maybe lifting up a driveway, because driveway is pretty critical. Some people don't realise, having a driveway going backward is no good, because we've got to actually collect the surface runoff for a driveway, and that could lead to an absorption. So we always try to see if we can maybe get an architect kind of lift the driveway up to get a 1% fall out to the street, because that essentially eliminates an absorption trench at the rear, which as an absorption trench does kind of have some restrictions, some setbacks from side and rear boundaries. That's another a little idea. And also if we can maybe even lift the site, because we believe under some planning controls that we can lift the site a few hundred mil to achieve natural fall out to the street. So integrating retaining walls. Also, Minh just did a job just recently now in Silverwater. It was pretty tricky job, but we kind of got over the line, and the client was honestly over the moon, I couldn't say, because he was trying to get an easement behind him, and the client behind him was being very difficult. There was actually an easement running through the property, but he misses his boundary by 1 metre. And so the neighbour behind him was actually asking him for a ridiculous amount of money for about 2 square metres of his land. And he asked us, he's like, look, we need to do something here. And Minh managed to kind of pull something together, and I'll get him to kind of describe what systems he put. It's quite a funny one, but we actually got that over the line. And the client was honestly couldn't be more satisfied. Do you want to tell Nathan about Silverwater?
So for that Stillwater site, so it's sloping from the front to the back for about 400 mils, which is not too bad. So that was a 3 terraces job.
It's Parramatta Council. So once it falls to the rear, it's automatic easement. No, there's no questions about it.
So for that particular site, so I've managed to split the system so that we have 3 terraces, but we end up with 6 different OSD. So that we can have a combination between the underground tank and also the above ground basin. So we end up with filling up the site for, I think, less than 600 mils, which is like compliance under CDC.
Yeah, that's really good.
We took a lot of thinking, but we actually got it over the line. It was hard because we had to juice an OSD to drain to another OSD to get it out. It was just
and I guess it's obviously that can be the tricky thing with negotiating easements, isn't it? The moment neighbours get greedy, and that's
a big thing.
That's one of the trickiest things I've found is people just see dollar signs often. The moment that you need to drain through a property behind or a neighbouring property, that can be the tricky part is they see dollar signs. So, so although I'm sure it was an expensive task to do that system that you did, it probably would have been cheaper than doing.
It was definitely much more cost effective than what the client behind was asking for, to be honest.
And then you take away the time factor too, because easements can take years sometimes to negotiate.
Exactly. And also the legal fees and all the title updates and all that comes into place as well, and registering it to the title, and there was quite a bit involved.
And I'm guessing you guys have come across sites where unfortunately people have bought a site without engaging a good engineer to assess sites. Have you looked at sites where you've just, unfortunately, there's nothing they can do other than an easement, and so it's meant unfortunately they've got a site that can't be developed.
Yeah, we've had that a couple of times, especially in Parramatta Council and Cumberland.
Yep.
People come from the Ryde Council area where you're allowed to do an absorption system at the rear.
Yes.
For a site-specific, just a restricted 40% impervious area for the site.
Yep.
And people used to come and say, "Oh, but I did it at Ryde City Council. Why can't I do it?" And I tell them, like, unfortunately, the two policies are very different. With Parramatta Council, they want an easement when it comes to a dual occupancy.
Yep.
They just tell you, look, this is what we need. We don't care how you get it. You just need to go and get it.
Yeah.
Whether if it's through, the court system or negotiating back and forth for a very long time. And unfortunately, sometimes that happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sorry as well, Nathan, thing is as well, people do have an understanding that easements is needed, but sometimes they don't think about what's behind them.
Yeah.
So we've had structures, a pool up against a boundary where you can't physically get an easement in there, or the building, it goes up to the full boundary, there's no site setback.
Yep.
So it would have to go to multiple lots, and some people don't think about that.
Yep.
They just think about, I'll just go straight through here, no problem. I'll see if I can kind of negotiate a deal with them.
Yeah.
But sometimes that's not the picture.
Yep.
And that could cause a lot of issues as well.
Yeah, that's true, isn't it? And
Yeah.
I saw one where there was a carport. They got the neighbour to agree, which is all well and good, but then all of a sudden they realised, wow, we've got to remove a carport, we've got to deal with the driveway or the concrete, all that side of it.
Yeah.
So good luck trying to get a neighbour then to tell them that they've got to take 900 mil
Yeah.
or a metre off their carport. And you're right. Like all of a sudden you're now paying two neighbours.
Yeah, multiple sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it depends on the fall of the natural ground as well, comes into place.
Yeah. Yeah.
And some people don't take into account the cost of reinstating people's backyards.
Yep. Yep.
Like, you got to rip it up and then reinstate it back to how it was.
Yep.
In order to get an easement over the line.
Yeah.
A lot of factors, to be honest.
And I guess a lot of these headaches can get alleviated, can't they, really, by talking to the right people before you buy that site?
Yeah, definitely. Look, piece of advice, I would say, if you don't know an engineering consultant, I would, speak to an architect. If not, if you, completely out of the picture, sometimes council give you some guidance, speaking to a stormwater engineering guy in council, they're quite helpful, and you just let them know what you want to do and what you're looking for, and sometimes they can give you the right advice.
Yep.
That's a good little, step one, and then moving on to the next after that.
Yeah. And I think just while we talk about council, I think every council's obviously got their own development control plan around stormwater drainage generally, don't they?
Correct. Yeah.
Now, obviously, people like yourself and myself, we're reading these DCPs, development control plans, day in, day out. So it comes natural to us. But I always say to people, if you are doing developments and investments, especially if you are suburb specific or council specific, you need to get to know that council. But there are obviously some people that do multiple councils, and that's where I think it is important to, build a team, have designers, architects, engineers, stormwater engineers, but I still think it's important for people to understand, do some of their own research too, so they know what type of systems are available. Like where would you encourage someone to go and look if they want to look at what stormwater systems are available in council? Do most councils have a DCP element for stormwater? Have you found in your research?
We have. Every council's got their own stormwater policy. Sometimes it's kind of itemized. Mint deals on a daily basis. If you want to find a single dwelling, it'll give you the list of options how you need to comply with a single dwelling. If you want to do a multi-residential development, you got to go to the multi-residential column, and it'll kind of break down all the specifics that you need. It's look, sometimes what's a good little trick I give a lot of people is, you're on your street, if you're on a busy street, go for a walk. Some people have kind of developed what you want, either if it's a dual occupancy or it's a house on a basement or a single dwelling, or if they've got that on the street, why don't you go and just have a walk and see what kind of system they have?
Yeah.
Sometimes that's a really good trick, because generally the contours are generally the same, so the natural ground, hopefully it doesn't change too much. If you're in a nice low flat profile. I always kind of tell everyone, just go walk down your street. You understand how some people are draining either to the rear, to the front, because you can see a curb outlet on the curb.
Yes.
sometimes they don't see that. So it's got to be going somewhere.
Yeah.
And that kind of helps people understand, oh, that's a great idea. You know, I encourage people, even just go for a walk down the street and you'll see the type of development that's happening there will give you a good indication.
Yeah.
You know, it's a good little thing.
That's a good little hack. It's funny too, because that's a little hack. You get the odd person. I've had different people over the years where they'll bring you 20 or 30 sites and none of them work. So I remember in some councils, I just said to them, like, it's the most simplest of hack, but if they don't have it, obviously there's a lot of mapping software now that can bring up the contours. Like I think 6 Maps can do it. You got Near Maps. You got all these different programs that can give you an idea of the contours.
Yeah.
But I always say to people when they're looking at real estate software, just like one of the simplest hacks to see if it is first and foremost forward sloping to the street. Yeah, have a look on Google Street View. Look for that little 90 or 100 mil
Outlet.
Like it
makes a big
make
difference.
It simple, and the beauty is then they can narrow down. Like obviously, just because you can't see that doesn't mean you can't drain it. But from a very simple perspective, to make life a bit easier, if you are wanting, a stress-free site and you know that you have to drain to the curb, you've got no other options.
Yeah,
that's the simplest little hack is go on Google Street View and just look for that little outlet.
Comes in so handy.
Yeah. And it just means then you're not having to take 20 sites that just don't work to your consultant.
Exactly.
So look, although it is, you never just want to rely on your own knowledge, especially if you're not a consultant. But I still think it's important for investors, developers, people doing projects to educate themselves on the systems that are available, so that you don't make wrong decisions, but also so that you're not bringing, ordinary sites to your consultants, because everyone's got a limit too. That's one thing I've tried to educate people on is. Still do your own research. You don't want to bring 20 bad sites. Because you wear your consultants out, and if they're constantly doing due diligence on bad sites, they're not able to do amazing work on your good sites. So it's a fine line.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Look,
That's a good point.
What about in terms of, like we spoke a little bit about absorption there before. Are there times with absorption where someone will need to spend a little bit of money to get that information? Like I know you spoke, Minh, about obviously that absorption works really well on a sandy site.
Correct.
I'm guessing there's times where it's important to get some sort of geotech carried out to determine if that absorption will work. Like just because a council says you can do absorption, is there still due diligence and maybe where the client or the has to go and spend some money to really determine what you're dealing with in terms of the soil, the capacity for that absorption?
Yeah. So I guess I'll give you an example in Bayside Council. So in Bayside Council, so they are along the coast. So the majority of the land is a soil area. So if you do like a single dwelling or dual occupancy, basically you can adopt an infiltration rate from council guidelines, but bear in mind that infiltration rate is going to be very conservative compared to the actual values of the soil. So it's better to get the geotech to do the actual investigation, do the borehole, get the actual testing results, so we can optimize the absorption system so that we can reduce the amount of trenches, reducing the cost and labors and all that. And then and at the same time in Bayside, there are areas where council just doesn't allow any absorption because they know for a fact that that's where it's transitioned from a sandy into a clay, so it doesn't work either way. So we wouldn't recommend to do like testing even, because it's not going to work one way or the other.
Yeah. Now, what about OSDs? Like we're talking, let's sort of talk townhouse development. Sort of, a lot of people are dabbling in maybe 3, 4s, 5s, 6, maybe even more up from there. But have you found that a lot of people, when it comes to their feasibility, they haven't factored in OSD systems, or they've? I'm sure you guys have had to also fix projects where maybe an OSD hasn't been designed well, or it's been overdone too. That I know you did that one for one of our projects. You fixed it up and you realised that it would have cost a lot of money, and we're dealing with rock, and you guys tidied it up and saved us a lot of money. Have you come across that a bit, like where?
Yeah, I would say quite a bit. There's a lot of variables we need to take into account. Especially mentioning rock is really important because we know how expensive that is to bring out the excavator with the hammer and the saw.
Yes.
So we kind of go for a more shallow approach for an OSD to minimise the excavation. And some people don't realise that OSDs are pretty pricey when it comes to the ones that are below ground because they're actually concrete in situ, so concrete base, concrete walls, concrete lid.
Yep.
Because some of these can blow out, 15, anywhere between 15 and 20,000 per OSD. Sometimes I've heard from the contractors. And if you're doing 3-4 of them, because, if you're doing a Torrens total and not a strata, development, you got to do for every individual one. And if you've got 4 of them, 4 times, 15 to 20,000 dollars, can be between 60 and 80 grand.
Yeah.
And people don't, take into account, the feasibility for that and also the legal fees, because an OSD is actually restricted to the title now when it's subdivided, and they need to think about registering it, doing registering it with council, land titles, and updating everything. All those fees come across as well.
Yep.
We always try to be the most cost effective. We always look after the client. It's the best possible way. But sometimes councils have strict guidelines.
Yep.
But there is different types of OSDs, whether being in a below ground, which is one, an above ground system where we're building retaining walls and kind of grading the natural ground to the OSD, and that kind of goes out, which is more cost effective because you're essentially just building walls around the OSD.
Yep.
And then probably the best possible, most cost effective way would be a rainwater tank / OSD system.
Yeah.
So essentially you're going to need a rainwater tank anyway for BAS6 to comply.
Yes.
So we just kind of double the scale of the tank generally. So if you need a 3,000 litre tank, if you do a combined tank, you need, say, 1,500 for OSD and 3,000 for BAS6.
Yep.
So it's a 4,500 litre tank. So we just kind of split the tank into two. So we have an outlet at midpoint of the tank instead of at the top where it overflows out. That would possibly be the most cost-effective way, and then I would say maybe an above ground, and then a below ground will be the most cost, to be honest.
Yeah. And I think you just nailed something there in regards to that, because I've seen that often where people just haven't factored in that cost early in their feasibility.
Yeah.
And I guess engaging with an engineer early in the piece.
Yeah.
And with obviously you need to know the strategy, what sort of footprint are they dealing with, how many townhouses, what sort of capacity. There's obviously a lot of factors for you involved in that, but I think it doesn't hurt to liaise with your team early in the piece. If you are going to, like you said, if you're going to do Torrens title, and that you do need to go OSD under the surface.
Yeah.
There are some costs there that can really blow things out. And I guess because most people that are doing developments and projects, they're doing it to generate some form of wealth. Is that an area where you guys are always looking for? Obviously, you've got to do something compliant, but is that something you guys are always very aware of? Is understanding the type of project someone is doing, so you're looking at solutions that can obviously, deal with the water, but also ensure that they're not overspending on areas where they don't need to.
Definitely. Especially in a couple of councils where if the building footprint doesn't reach a certain percentage, so hard surface area, including driveways, and the size of building, you can actually do not need an OSD.
Yes.
So sometimes building footprints are just like 5 square meters bigger than if we, kind of communicate that to the client, just say, look, are you happy to make the building footprint 5 square meters smaller? We get to avoid OSDs on both sites. Yeah. So you want to work out your feasibility of, reducing the footprint, and we can eliminate 2 OSDs, anywhere between 30 and 40,000, 2 of them.
Yep.
And sometimes they're just, sometimes it's worth it just to make it that little bit smaller, because 5 square meters might not make a difference, because if it's well planned and you're still achieving all the requirements for that specific area, sometimes you still get a greater outcome out of it.
Yeah. No, that's good. And I think the beauty is then if someone has factored in, let's say 20K per townhouse for an OSD in their initial feasibility, obviously if you can avoid that, well, there's upside. There's some additional profit,
Of course.
on the development.
Yeah.
But if they do have to do it, and if they are going to get the best outcome of going that pathway, well, they've factored it in, so there's no stress.
Yeah, definitely.
So I guess early in that piece, it probably is good to factor in that you may need that.
Yeah, the best is like, when you factor OSDs in and they're factoring below grounds, and then we managed to get it in a combined rain tank OSD, you're paying a little bit extra, but you've cut the cost by 1/3. That's completely gone.
Yeah.
And they're just, can't be more happier, to be honest.
Yeah. Obviously, a stormwater design for a DA versus a CC versus a CDC, the documentation level is different. Obviously, you hear in a DA, someone will say, or council will tell you need a stormwater concept. Can you just run us through the difference between, and I've seen this, sometimes you'll get a client or a developer have a bit of get a bit upset because they're like, I've already got my stormwater for DA, then they've got to get additional things done for CDC. And I think it's important to talk about this one because I think it helps educate people doing projects to understand that just because you've got a concept for DA doesn't mean it's ready for construction. So can you guys just run us through the difference between when you do a stormwater design for a DA, let's just say whether it be a duplex or some townhouses versus a CC, just so people understand. That way they're not thinking that they're getting tricked or they're getting hoodwinked. And maybe it'll probably help town planners, architects, designers as well, educate clients as well on the fact that, hey, there's two parts to this. Do you want to just run us through that? Well, the difference between a stormwater design for DA versus a CC?
Yep. So for stormwater DA, we generally focus on simplifying the design in terms of the drainage design for the building itself. So because for DA, we generally want to show council the minimum requirements that what we have to do. So from a council's perspective, they only worry about is there any external catchment going through the site and how we capture it and divert it around the site? Is the on-site detention required? And how are we gonna dispose the stormwater runoff? So those are the main items that council would like to look at. So those are the important items that we tick off during the DA. So we don't want to show too much information for the building itself because, as you can see, that the building can be changed and there are a variety of different solutions we can give in terms of the internal drainage of the building. So we don't want to, provide those information and then we have to change it later on if the building does change something. So that's for the DA. But for CDC, we do like a full compliance and detailed design for both building and the site stormwater management. Yeah, so that's the difference between those two.
Yep.
And also I want to add is that during the DA, so council does approve the concept stormwater plans. But what a lot of people don't realize that they approve the plans, but they also sometimes put a lot of conditions in their consent, which people don't really aware of that. So they just what they mean is that they generally happy with the concept design, but they want item A, B, C, D needs to be addressed in the CC.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's something to think about. So from DA, we have to update our plans according to their conditions to satisfy the CC and go for construction.
Yeah. Yeah, and you hit a really good point there because I think that's where a lot of people, they overlook their consent.
Correct.
Sometimes that list keeps going on.
Yeah.
It just doesn't stop.
Yeah. And have you had instances where you believe that some of the conditions that council have imposed are either not required or over the top, where you've been able to go back to council and
yeah, we've had that
Yeah,
heaps of
that
time.
happens
We
many
can tell
times,
that's a
yeah.
copy paste. Sometimes condition, we're like, hold
And
on a minute,
sometimes
we've
it's
got nothing on
mistakes,
this.
isn't
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
pretty quite common. But sometimes private certifiers do understand, because we kind of communicate that with them. Look, we have this doesn't, we kind of really relate to this development. They're like, we totally understand. Just give us an email confirming this, and it's not a problem, you know, on their end.
Yeah.
That's quite common, to be honest.
Yeah. And I know even in myself, owning a design firm where I've had to go back to council and actually hit them up on matters of that consent. And that's why it's so important to read your consent.
Yeah.
Have a team around you that read that consent, look at that consent, because it can really bring you unstuck, or it can cause unnecessary costs and sometimes even delays too.
Of course.
Where someone thinks, beauty, I've got the DA approved, but they don't read the consent. Yeah. No, that's really good. And look, from a CC point of view then, so we've touched on DA, CDC. So you've got the concept, stormwater design.
Yeah.
It's been DA approved. So then in terms of the CC then, so essentially it's going back to you guys. So the stormwater design's going back to you, and you're obviously looking through that consent.
Yeah.
And you're making sure that the construction certificate documentation addresses that consent.
Yeah, pretty much. When it comes down after the DA approval has been given, we like to communicate with the builder too and how he likes to do things. And sometimes, DA consent changes your design too, and we need to adopt to that design because it can change a lot. Like, I'm sure you've been in the scenario where it's the DA condition comes across, and then apparently on the DA condition you need to raise open subfloor, and then hold on a minute, we never were asked to get a flood advice letter. And sometimes, some councils put a lot of conditions on there, and sometimes it changes the design completely.
Yep.
And also, council just only want to look at the method of discharge, whether it's going to the front, how you're doing it, to the back, where is it going, or it's on site. That's pretty much what they want.
Yep.
In terms of when it's CC, that's when the physical work happens. So we need to make sure all of our documentation is ready for construction.
Yep.
And we need to communicate that all with all of our consultants, to be honest. And that's how it goes.
Excellent. Very good. Well, look, I think we might wrap it up, but even if maybe just one last little piece of advice you might want to give to a residential investor developer doing projects, anything from duplexes up, is there any little tips or any bit of wisdom you can leave us with?
Honestly, the most important thing and, most efficient, quickest thing is just check your title search, your 10.7. I could say that's the most two important things where it's not going to cost you money. You're looking to buy a property that comes with a contract of sale, and all of these items come in with that contract of sale. Honestly, look at that, and if you guys do not understand, how to interpret these items, contact an engineer. If not, maybe try to go to council or professional yourself, Nathan, that has engineers working alongside, and that we can always help them out like that way.
Great, very good. Well, it's been so good to have you guys on.
Thanks, Nathan.
Where's the best place? I think having a good stormwater engineer is so vital in doing developments and projects, whether from due diligence all the way through to doing projects. What's the best way for people to get in touch if they've got a lot of value out of this podcast? Where can people find you guys at?
Honestly, just type our name of Vanguard Consulting Engineers. You'll find our website. We've got landlines. You're directed to our stormwater department. Flick us an email. We'll get back to you. Just let us know what type of development you wanting to do. Give us the address. Or even if you are looking not specifically for a site, just tell us the suburb, and then we can give you a guideline on, single dwellings, you can do this, dual occupancy, you can do this, multi-residential, you need to do this. We're definitely happy to help anyone out.
Yeah, terrific. Well, it's been good to have you guys on. I'm sure we'll get you back to talk about another topic at some point. But look, thanks for jumping on this episode today. I know I've learned a lot once again, and look, if you've got a lot of value out of today's session, make sure you like and subscribe. Feel free to share this around. Share it with family, friends, anyone you know that's interested or passionate about doing projects and developments. All the details for the guys at Vanguard are going to be in the show notes. So be sure to reach out to them if you've got any questions around your development or a site you're looking at. I'm sure they'll be able to help you. So thanks for listening in, and we'll see you next week.